The Washington Commanders are clearly all in on their 2024 roster after making a big trade for one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. Marshon Lattimore is a Commander. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, also helping out with WUSA9.com's coverage of the team this year. I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through today. Every day, there's a special thank you to you for coming through every single day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, which we're going to dive into the ramifications of the Marshon Lattimore trade. We're going to talk about who Marshon Lattimore is with Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson. And we're going to start it all off, of course, with talking about the fact that the Washington Commanders clearly have gotten the message that their team is not just in retooling mode. This team is in competition mode this season, first year under Adam Peters and head coach Dan Quinn, as demonstrated by the trade for cornerback Marshon Lattimore. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So the Washington Commanders made good on the NFL trade deadline, bringing in Pro Bowl caliber cornerback Marshon Lattimore from the New Orleans Saints on Tuesday. That news coming out Tuesday afternoon. All of your usual suspects, the Schefters, the Rappaports of the world, dealing at that information out. Of course, the rumors and the murmurs in the back channel started to heat up about Marshon Lattimore potentially becoming a Washington Commander in the early hours of November 5th. The day of the NFL trade deadline. I was talking with insiders at certain points throughout the day. Very busy Tuesday for me. So as I could, I was checking in with the insiders in the morning, woke up kind of saying, there are some reasons for the Washington Commanders to make trades. Still kind of had the gut feeling that maybe Adam Peters wasn't going to necessarily swing for the fences on this one. And then as the day progressed, talking to more people, getting some text messages from good friends of mine, the smoke started to just grow and grow and grow. And at one point in time, text the insiders and say, hey guys, hold on to your seats, because the conversation about the Commanders and the Saints having real talks about Marshon Lattimore is in fact real. And it wasn't long after that text went out to the insiders that the news broke that Marshon Lattimore is coming, to the Washington Commanders. The compensation looks like this. New Orleans Saints are getting the Washington Commanders' 3rd round pick, the Washington Commanders' 4th round pick, and it's getting the 6th round pick that the Washington Commanders had gotten in the John Ridgeway trade, sending John Ridgeway to the Saints. In return for those, Washington Commanders are getting Marshon Lattimore, and they're getting the Saints' 5th round pick in 2025. Of course, you remember the New Orleans or the Philadelphia Eagles got the Washington Commanders' 5th round pick in the trade that involved Jahan Dotson. So basically the Commanders are getting a 5th round pick back. And in fact, as of right now, and the expectation is that 5th round pick from the Saints will be earlier than the 5th round pick that the Commanders sent to the Philadelphia Eagles. So you're getting a net gain in that 5th round pick swap. Talking about the 3rd round pick. Now, look, we don't know if that's the organic Washington 3rd round pick or if that is the 3rd round pick that they got from the Philadelphia Eagles. And in that, we don't know if that 3rd round pick from the Philadelphia Eagles is actually the Eagles' 3rd round pick or the Dolphins' 3rd round pick. And yes, I did reach out to each team and ask them at the time. Neither team wanted to discuss that. I'm hoping maybe I can get some information from the Saints side of this thing to find out which 3rd round pick that is. Either way, basically the Washington Commanders sending one of the 2 3rd round picks they had in their pocket to the New Orleans Saints in part of this deal. And then their 4th round pick. So when you break it all down, you basically essentially trade Jahan Dotson, John Ridgeway, and a 4th round pick to get Marshon Lattimore and a 5th round pick. And that's kind of a very surface way to look at this thing. But when you look at the work that Adam Peters has been able to do, not just in constructing a coaching staff or bringing in the right coach to construct the right coaching staff, but also bringing in the players that they brought in and how effective they've been in these systems, in these schemes under this new coaching staff. But now this trade on top of some of the other trades he's made. I mean, Adam Peters, if he is not the leader for executive GM of the year, I don't know who is. And you're bringing in a guy, Marshon Lattimore, who 28 years old, turns 29 in May. And again, if you watched or heard the last episode that we published before this one, at the end of that episode, we did a little bit of trade deadline preview, and Marshon Lattimore, of course, was the main focal point of that. Now, Marshon is a player who's known as a lockdown corner. That's his reputation around the league. He's got interceptions in every single season he's played so far in the NFL, except for this current season. So he's looking to continue that streak now as a member of the Washington Commanders. And in totality, that gives him 15 career interceptions, including 5 in his rookie season, 4 All-Star, 4 Pro Bowl selection seasons, 2017, 2019, 2020, and 2021. Now, there are some concerns, right, from some people. And so I wanted to kind of just acknowledge the concerns and kind of talk about those. One of the concerns, Marshon Lattimore's availability. Injuries have plagued his last couple of seasons, and he's missed games during stretches of time. We're actually going to talk to Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints about that availability, about that injury history. So I'm going to let Ross, who obviously has been covering Marshon with the New Orleans Saints, give you that information from him. That way there's no mixed message there between the two of us. But then there's also the salary cap implications. Marshon Lattimore signed a really big deal not that long ago. He's still got 3 years, including this season, left on that deal. The good news for the Washington Commanders is that less than $1 million in guaranteed money is still due on that contract this year. And the next 2 years of the current contract, none of that money is guaranteed. So this is literally a deal that the Washington Commanders can get out of if they need to. But basically what it does is it benefits both sides. It benefits the Washington Commanders to come to the table, negotiate with Marshon Lattimore to rework those final 2 years, maybe guarantee some money, turn some of that non-guaranteed money into bonuses, things like that. And it behooves Marshon Lattimore to come to the table because he doesn't want to go into his future with nothing guaranteed. He wants to definitely try to lock down any guaranteed money that he possibly can from the remainder of that contract. And by doing so, maybe you move some money around, maybe you do some things to lessen some of these cap hits. So if you're concerned about the upcoming cap hits, over $10 million per year on the next 2 years remaining, don't be too worried about it, because if it's something that Adam Peters and the Washington Commanders need to manage from a book standpoint, they have all the flexibility in the world and the leverage to be able to work that. So I'm not too worried about the money situation moving forward either. Honestly, the Washington Commanders could just pay Marshon Lattimore. It's not guaranteed, but they could pay him for every game that he plays in and does what he needs to do to get that money and still be fine salary cap wise. You're still talking about over $80 million in available cap space if they need to in order to do that. From a perspective of on the field, what does Marshon Lattimore bring to the Washington Commanders defense? Well, again, this cornerback group, when we've talked about approaching the NFL trade deadline, we've all been talking about corners. We've been talking about pass rushers. I've been telling you guys that honestly with Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler, Frankie Louvu, Cleveland Farrell, I don't really see a place where this team's going to take a big swing at a big name pass rusher like Zadarius Smith, like Azeez Ojulari. I just don't know if I see the room in that rotation to justify the draft capital that they would have to send for it. But cornerback certainly was an area that you could see this team attack. That's what they end up doing. What Marshon Lattimore is really going to bring to the field, honestly, some of it is a psychological deterrent. So you look at the targets this year. So Marshon Lattimore, his PFF coverage grade right now, 71.6. I know some people like and don't like PFF coverage grades, but beyond the 71.6 coverage grade, 14 targets, guys. That's how many times Marshon Lattimore has been targeted this season, 14 times. Compare that to Noah Igbenogany, who has been targeted 37 times. Noah Igbenogany did not start this season as an every down player for the Washington Commanders. Mikey Sainristil, 37 targets this season. Benjamin St-Juste, 55 targets this season. The only 2 cornerbacks on this team that have played in the game that have gotten less targets than Marshon Lattimore, Emmanuel Forbes with 9, Michael Davis with 5. Think about how little Emmanuel Forbes has played. He's only been targeted 5 fewer times than Marshon Lattimore, despite the amount of times Emmanuel Forbes hasn't been on the field. That is how often quarterbacks are going away from Marshon Lattimore. We're going to hear a little bit more about that from Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints as well, because that is a big part of what the Washington Commanders just got in their new Pro Bowl caliber cornerback. Let's hear from Ross Jackson coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we'll do that thanks to Ultimate GM. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate GM. Hey, Commanders fans, remember our great partner, Ultimate Pro Football GM? Well, they're back, and they have added an amazing new game mode I need to tell you about. The game that has you step into the shoes of a football franchise GM and lead it to glory now has a head coach career mode. So on top of getting to build your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring coaching staffs, you now also get to call offensive plays during the game as well. Additionally, you'll dig the new tools you can work with, such as individual training camps and upgraded negotiation systems. So this fun and realistic game just got a lot better. If you already have it installed, be sure to do an update so you can try out the new mode. If you don't have it yet, download it right now. It's a must-have for all football fans. I love it, and I know you will too. Ultimate Pro Football GM is completely free. It's got no ads, and it's 100% playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. And here's a special offer for Locked On fans. Use the promo code Locked On NFL, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. Make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage you'll want in creating your dynasty. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate Pro Football GM, start your dynasty today. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks, and with Prize Picks, you can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player set projections for the coming week, and if you are correct, you can win money. And again, with as few as 4 correct picks, you can win up to 100 times your money. Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. So sign up today and get a $50 bonus when you play $5. You don't even have to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So if you think you have 2 to 6 players that you know they're going to hit more than or less than on their stat projections, cook up your hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code Locked On NFL. Again, LOCKEDON NFL, all one word, all lowercase, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Commanders, and if you want to get more out of Locked On Commanders, all you got to do is become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And just like the insiders did today, you will get text message updates from rumors that I'm hearing, things that I'm hearing, and we'll have discussions about what's going down. We even threw together a bonus insider exclusive only Zoom after the news officially broke. It was a little bit choppy because my internet signal wasn't all that great where it was at the moment, but we got a good 5 minutes or so out of it. It wasn't the greatest, but it was something we were able to connect and have a good time enjoying the trade. So again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to try becoming an insider for free the first 2 weeks. Now let's get into our conversation with Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson about what Marshon Lattimore is going to bring to the Washington Commanders defense. And first off, how good of a fit is it going to be for a defense that likes to be physical, get after the football, and dominate opposing offenses?
Perfectly, David. He's going to be a perfect fit for that type of system. That's exactly what he was asked to do here in New Orleans by former head coach, former defensive coordinator, Dennis Allen. The Saints' brand of football over on the defensive side was very press man coverage heavy. It was all about physicality. And Marshon was one of the better run support corners in the NFL. I was talking about it earlier. I think that Dan Quinn's going to love Marshon Lattimore just because of how active he is in run support alone. But the other thing that he does very well is that like he hustles, he tussles with those big quintessential X style receivers, the big bodied guys. That's exactly who Marshon Lattimore loves to match up against, loves the physicality. It's a big part of his game.
Yeah, and you talk about tussles, right? Fortunately for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they've already played the Washington Commanders this season,
that's right.
So they don't have to worry about a Mike Evans, Marshon Lattimore duel there in burgundy and gold instead of gold and black. But the other part, so you talk about the press man coverage thing, and I think that's a really big part of the inspiration here, right? We haven't talked to Adam Peters, the GM, or Dan Quinn, the coach, yet since the trade has been made, but I anticipate that's going to be a part of this because gradually through the season, you've seen the Washington Commanders shift to more of a zone defense, more zone than you expect them to be, and they certainly were early on. I think part of that is, one, they're getting beat. Two, they're not getting a lot of ball production. They're not getting a lot of takeaways, and you're not getting takeaways. What you got to do is bend, don't break, right? Make those teams make mistakes, make them kick field goals, do all those things. Now with Marshon, though, I know he hasn't had an interception this season, but he's had an interception every season of his career so far, and assuming he gets one here this year with Washington, that streak will continue. How is that ball hawking show up on the field? Like, what is it that Marshon does that allows him to take advantage of opposing quarterbacks?
Yeah, look, he's not the type of corner that like runs a route for a wide receiver, but he is the type of corner that will beat you to the catch point. He will. He's got really good closing speed, and he'll use that closing speed sometimes to bait quarterbacks into throwing his way. He also does a very good job of crashing down on in or out breaking routes and finding the right angle. His angle on the football is typically pretty safe and sound. And so I think that those are places where he does that. It's a natural ability thing that allows him to be able to kind of turn on the jets and then be able to undercut some passes and things like that. But really, the thing about Marshon Lattimore is that he doesn't get a lot of takeaways because typically he's forcing quarterbacks to throw to the other guys. So really the idea here is that you get a Marshon Lattimore to make the opposing quarterback hold on to the football a little bit longer, move forward in the progressions, have to throw at somebody else, but also have to throw at somebody else half a second later, a full second later, which could be enough time for that pass to come out under pressure. It could be enough time for that pass to come out ill-timed. Could be enough time for that pass to come out at the wrong angle or not being able to throw to the right spot. That's where Marshon Lattimore's lockdown kind of moniker comes from, is his ability to not be targeted, force that quarterback to move through the progressions, given the pass rush time to get home, or maximizing the opportunity for takeaways elsewhere on the defense.
Yeah, you basically erase an entire route, right, in the progression, like you said, by just having them over there, and that, in some ways, I talked about it here earlier. In some ways, that's gonna put more pressure on guys like Benjamin St-Juste, who's not known as the greatest takeaway artist, but hey, look, time to earn your money when you're over there, and the Washington Commanders obviously have been a big surprise to people. I don't think anybody, if we go back to August, nobody's going to predict that in the beginning of November they're going to steal a Dallas Cowboys term all in on building, turning their roster into a championship caliber roster at this point in the season. But that's what they've done. And part of what's allowed them to do that is what they call this brotherhood and this standard that the players themselves have set inside the locker room of doing your job, communicating, playing smart assignment football. How is Marshon going to fold into this Washington Commanders room that really is built all about everybody doing what's best for everybody, not what's best for the individual?
Yeah, that might be the one place where there might be a little bit of a disconnect. Marshon Lattimore is very much kind of a loner. He's kind of the guy that is the top guy, and he kind of works off by himself. I've heard a lot of stories from former and present Saints defensive backs talking about those defensive backs kind of being in the cafeteria and like grabbing lunch together or something like that. And Marshon's still out on the field working. That's probably, there's worse things to be than a hard worker, of course, everything like that. So I'm not trying to say anything negative about where Marshon is, but I don't know how other players sometimes take to that when there is sort of this brotherhood community kind of, kumbaya session that could be going on. And Marshon might not be a part of that because he's out on the field and things like that. So that might be where there could be a little bit of a disconnect, but I think that he doesn't do those things, in my experience and from what I've been told, as a means of separating himself from his teammates. He's just got a ridiculous work ethic. And that's kind of the way that he carries himself. So I could see a little bit of the maybe adjustment having to be made before he's really playing along with that. But if you notice some distance between him and the other guys, it's not out of lack of interest. It's that he just is a hard worker. And he's a guy that relies a lot more on natural ability than talent, or excuse me, natural talent than fundamentals and basics and things like that. And so if you're going to do that, you have to be at the top of your game at all times. And I think that's part of that drive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point to make. Like if you're going to live off of that athletic ability better be top shelf. And certainly when Marshon's on the field, it appears to be just that. And this group's going to love the hardworking attitude. I don't know that they need to go bowling to be successful on the field. I think they'll be okay. Hopefully with that. Now let's talk about availability, right? And Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, as well as I do, our boss of the network, NFL channel coordinator Ross Jackson, hates when we bury the lead, but availability, the most important ability, might be the most important thing here for Marshon. So hopefully that guy can forgive us for talking about it here in the interview. But let's talk about the injury concerns, right? Because a lot of people, a lot of Commanders fans, when these rumors start spinning up and we kind of start talking like, hey guys, this might be an actual thing, kind of start saying like, look how many games this guy has missed. What kind of context can you provide to us about the amount of time that Marshon has missed over the last couple, 2-3 seasons?
Yeah, I would say that the present injury that he's dealing with, which is a hamstring injury that sidelined him for 2 games plus 2 halves of games, also 2 second halves of separate games, is something to keep an eye out on. He does have a history with hamstring injuries throughout his collegiate time and stuff like that. So that is definitely something to keep an eye out on. The 2022 injury, however, this is an injury that took place where Marshon Lattimore sprinted to the opposite side of the field to get in on a play and try to stop a touchdown pass in the end zone that he had no business being a part of because he was on almost the opposite side of the field. He dove to make the play, came down hard, and lacerated his kidney. And I think I said over on Locked On Saints, there's no amount of weightlifting that you're going to be doing, Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday to get ready for a Sunday game to keep your kidney from being lacerated. So it was a bit of a fluke injury. Last year in 2023, he was rolled up on. That's not an injury-prone thing. That happens to a lot of players. So I really pushed back against the injury-prone tag that Marshon started to gather here in New Orleans. But the hamstring injury in particular is still something to watch. But I don't know how much better that hamstring injury gets when he's in a winning situation as opposed to a losing situation. And then what that threshold of, yes, I'm willing to play through this, becomes at that time. Because I mean, I know if I was in his shoes, I'm willing to play through a little bit more discomfort if I'm playing for a team that's winning games. I'm not willing to push further than I need to for a team that's losing games. That's just me. That's why I don't play football. That's why I talk in front of a microphone. But if something like that happens for Marshon Lattimore and all of a sudden he's in a better situation, then maybe that threshold is slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what, and we've all kind of pointed that. We'll see obviously what happens, right? But you feel like the Washington Commanders, even the Kansas City Chiefs who are in on this conversation, like they're not going to go look at a guy and have a serious conversation about trading for a guy who may not be able to play, because clearly that's what you're going to want him to be able to do. So we're all kind of hoping
doing that specifically.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Big thank you once again to Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints for coming through here. The only thing we need to talk about next in this Marshon Lattimore trade reaction episode is what's next for the Washington Commanders and for some of the Washington Commanders roster members. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now you can win $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins with FanDuel. FanDuel is a sportsbook app that gives you everything you need to place your live in-game NFL bets all in one place. In the middle of any NFL game, you get yourself a hunch. You say, you know what? I think the game flow tells me this. The opponents tell me this. I believe X is about to happen. You go to FanDuel, you get the latest stats, you view the play-by-play, and you get so much more on the exact same page, on the exact same app, that you can place your bet. So go to FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch or make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, talking about what is next for the Washington Commanders following the signing of cornerback, or the signing of the trade for cornerback Marshon Lattimore. Well, let's get to the roster move that was made. The Washington Commanders releasing defensive lineman F.A. Obata shortly before the 4 p.m. trade deadline. And I think a lot of people were a little bit surprised by that fact, because I think a lot of people were waiting for the other shoe to fall on cornerback Emmanuel Forbes. And by the way, we've talked about this from time to time here on the program. Emmanuel Forbes, even though he hasn't been getting reps and wasn't getting snaps, had been listed as a starter still on the Washington Commanders unofficial depth chart on the team website. Not a big deal, but they are required by, NFL bylaws and all that stuff to provide a realistic depth chart on their website. Well, that has changed to Mikey Sainristil, Benjamin St-Juste, Noah Benogany being your starters, which is what we've seen throughout the season, at least the last few weeks, where they kind of tinkered and dabbled with some other combinations. But for the most part, that is the trio that we've seen lately, is Mikey Sainristil and Benjamin St-Juste outside, with Noah Benogany on the inside. Now with Marshon Lattimore coming to the team, and he's not officially on the team website yet because the move hasn't officially been processed and all that stuff just yet. It is going to happen. There's no doubt there. But Emmanuel Forbes Jr. is listed as a backup now. And the question was, would Emmanuel Forbes be traded? The news leaked out on Monday, rather, that the team had been kind of putting out feelers there. Josina Anderson put it out. We talked about it on our last episode. They've been putting out feelers to see kind of what kind of value could they potentially get. So I think from that report, a lot of us expected that Emmanuel Forbes would probably be traded. At the end of the day, he's not traded. What it means for his future is still a little bit unknown. Could he be released? Sure. It doesn't really seem like a move that they'll probably make. There's certainly a high possibility that they just keep him on board, maybe try to get him to learn some more under this defense, learn from a guy like Marshon Lattimore, who you just heard from Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints, is known as this insane worker, just wants to get out there and maximize his athletic potential and ability and work on his skills as much as possible. Maybe Emmanuel can learn something from that mentality, something of that dog kind of mentality on the football field. And he's still got a few years left, or 2 years really, but left on his rookie deal that are not going to cost you a lot to keep him on board. It's different than it was with Jamin Davis. Jamin Davis is playing on the last year of his rookie contract. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. If you can't trade him, you don't really have a lot of reason to keep him on board, because you're not going to re-sign him. So you let him go out there. Maybe a team picks him up. Eventually he ends up with the Green Bay Packers, and let's see if he can catch on in the NFL there. With Emmanuel Forbes Jr., you don't have any compelling reason to get rid of him unless you need to open up a different roster spot. So that's why a lot of people came into the post 4 p.m. Area thinking maybe he was going to get cut. But Efe Obada ends up being the guy that they release. And now, unless they need to make a move to bring somebody else up on their active roster, Emmanuel Forbes, at least for now, seems to be relatively safe. Now, I do believe he's probably the 53rd guy on the roster. Either he or Derek Forrest, to me, looks like to be the 53rd guy on the active roster. So if they have a reason to make a move to say maybe put Chris Rodriguez on the active roster again, in order to put Chris Rodriguez on the active roster again, they'd have to sign him to the active roster permanently because he's already been called up from the practice squad 3 times. The practice squad rules right now, you can bring up a player 3 times from the practice squad, but in order to keep him active for a 4th game, he has to be signed to the active roster. In order to do that, they'd have to obviously clear up a spot, which probably goes to either Emmanuel Forbes being released or, like I said, Derek Forrest. I think you probably lean towards one of those 2 players just from looking at the snap counts and game flows. Ever since Tyler Owens was able to come back, Derek Forrest has once again gone back to being a weekly inactive. So that's just kind of how I'm reading the tea leaves. When we talk about the future of the Washington Commanders, what does it look like? Very clearly, Benjamin St-Juste is going to get a lot more targets from the presence of Marshon Lattimore. So we're recording this. It's nighttime now in here in Virginia. And somewhere, I think I hear the sound of Benjamin St-Juste on a jugs machine, preparing to get passes thrown to him at a very higher rate than they already have been. Mikey Sanders still expect him to move back inside. Again, Marshon Lattimore is dealing with a hamstring injury. You heard Ross Jackson and I talk about that. I have the inkling that this might be a Devontae Adams situation where he gets to Washington and suddenly that hamstring is feeling a whole lot better. If it's not, Mikey Sanders might still be holding down that outside position for a little while, but eventually the expectation is that Mikey Sanders will move back inside. And again, if quarterbacks are coming off of Marshon Lattimore's guy, that means that Mikey Sanders will also get some more targets. Quan Martin might get some opportunities to come up and do that again. But also, you heard Ross Jackson talk about Marshon Lattimore as a supporter of the run defense. These perimeter runs, we've talked about these C-gap, D-gap runs. Jeremy Chin has gotten a lot better in the last few weeks in his individual pursuit. I think the pursuit of the entire defense has gotten better on these edge runs overall, but Marshon Lattimore being a very strict, very stubborn run defender on the outside there with the cornerback position, certainly going to add a lot to that dynamic. So there's a lot of trickle down, a lot of ripple effects here for this Washington Commanders defense with the addition of Marshon Lattimore. We'll be back out at Ashburn on Wednesday. We're going to hear from Adam Peters. We're scheduled to hear from Adam Peters at 12:15. We're scheduled to hear from Dan Quinn at 12:30. Then we'll have our first practice since the trade went down. So looking to see Marshon Lattimore out there potentially wearing burgundy and gold for the first time. Moving on to the week, of course, we got the Pittsburgh Steelers coming up. They had another move that they made today. So we've got a lot to talk about here this week coming up. We'll continue to do so with our crossover Thursday episode. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers coming through. So make sure you come for that. In the meantime, if you've got any questions or comments, all you got to do, become a Locked On Commanders insider. Text me today by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. In the morning, you get the Madman Tyler Rowland kicking you off with a morning, a double shot NFL espresso. And in the afternoon, go through the barbershop to talk to Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. And if it's Wednesday, it's me with Tony Wiggins in the afternoon. So come through. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, every dayers. Thanks for coming through like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. And I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.